becomes the consultant. Sign in, please. Pretend that you're voting for another deliberative vote. Are people missing that you know? $99? Okay, I think it doesn't matter in some ways because we're going to count the ballots. So we have 100. Okay, so they'll distribute the ballots. Again, vote for one name only, please. Does everyone have a ballot?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101.
Ready?
Joseph opposite. Pedro Lopez. 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 Joseph opposite. Pedro Lopez. Joseph opposite. Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Paul Wynn, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Joseph Appetit, Ramon Correa, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Ramon Correa, Joseph Appetit, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Joseph Appetit, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, blank, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Vincent Ferreira, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Ramon Correa, Pedro Lopez, Paul Wynn, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Pedro Lopez, Joseph Appetit. The results of the ballot: Pedro Lopez 68, Joseph Appetit 26, Ramon Correa 4, Paul Wynn 2, blank 1. Pedro Lopez is elected.
Pedro, ¿aceptas su elección a consultor general?
Mi provincial me va a matar y mi parroquia de Sevilla, que lo está viendo también, pero si puedo servir así a la congregación, encantado, acepto el nombramiento.
Thank you. just make a couple of announcements before we finish for the day, please. That there is the sign out outside to mark in for meals for this weekend. There's a film this evening at 8:30 here, and the translation will be provided. I misspoke, or I spoke the way I wanted to, but I was wrong. I should not ask a group to work on the weekend. So the groups that have not finished their work on renewed mission or renewed hearts will continue that on Monday, and we will begin a new section on Monday as well. So I want to leave word to your attention, please. I want to leave word for Father General now. Please, could I have your attention?
I realize that we are at the end of a long day, at the end of a week that has been very full, with different aspects of our work together as a chaplain. In this moment, my first word is to say welcome and thank you to all the members of the General Council whom you have elected. I look forward to continuing to work with Alberto and Jeffrey. I look forward to beginning this work together with Sebastian, Pedro, Nicolas, and Rogerio. I think that the Holy Spirit has guided us as a body in choosing the leadership for this sexennium. It will be a real privilege to work with this group of men. They are an extraordinary group when you look at them, and I think it bodes very well for this sexennium and the direction that you as a general chapter have already begun to set and will continue to work on in the time that remains in our hands. I will have a bit more to say about this on Monday, but I cannot leave this afternoon without saying a word of gratitude to the men who have served as general consultors for the last 7 years. I thank them for their dedication and the way in which they have placed themselves so generously and completely at the service of the mission of the Redeemer. In serving the mission of the Redeemer, they have placed themselves in particularly at the service of the congregation and of all those who share our mission in the Redemptorist family. I know it is not easy to come from a mission team, to come from a very active parish responsibility, to come from a missionary territory and move to Rome. There are wonderful things about living in Rome, and that experience lasts about 48 hours. Not to discourage the ones who are coming now, and please, Father Gianni, don't take offense as provincial of Rome, but he is from Sardinia, so. But it is a very special and unique service, this mission as member of the general government. And we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to these men. And so I would ask them to stand and let us acknowledge them for the work they have done. Enrique Lopez, Jacek Dembek, Yatsik Dembek. But also for the past sexennium, Jeffrey Roll and Alberto Aceto. There will be a little more to say to the new council in the days ahead. But I couldn't let us go tonight without acknowledging these 6 men who have served for the past 7 years in this sexennium. Would you please sit back down again for a moment? I also want to say a word of gratitude to the 5 lay partners who have been with us. Before you start to applaud, I would ask them to stand, and please let them all stand before you applaud so that we can see who they are. Ann Walsh, Roxanne Latorre, Rafael Junquera, Jose Antonio Hidalgo, Malcolm Salida, they will be leaving us over the course of the next few days. The first ones will begin to go tomorrow. So you might have a chance to speak to them individually at supper tonight or afterwards. But I want the 5 of you to know that you have left quite an impression on this chapter body, and that we are grateful for your generosity, for your frankness, for your participation in the groups, for your introductions and presentation yesterday. But most especially, we are grateful for the 150 years that you have been in mission together with us in different parts of this world. Christ the Redeemer works through us all. And when we form one missionary body, that body must acknowledge all its members. And in that one body, we bear witness to the reality of God's inclusive love for everyone and everything created. Thank you for being here with us, and thank you to the many, many thousands you represent who are not present in this room. We still have decisions to make, but I have a feeling that those 150 years are probably going to double or more as we look at forging a path ahead. There is a saying that we make the path by walking. And we're pleased that you have walked with us and helped to create a path forward. Vamos adelante with hope, courage, and of course, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and accompanied by that first missionary disciple, Mary, who is our perpetual help. Thank you very, very much for being here. I'm sorry to be so long-winded tonight. We're just about to conclude. I will pass the mic back to Kevin. But make sure you get some rest this weekend, because if you think you've been working this week, you haven't seen anything